A small New England community known mostly for being a summer town was home to one of the most challenging films ever made. A piece of cinema that, despite its historic troubled production, persevered to not only become a critical and box office success, but broke multiple records and set the standards for summer blockbusters, and terrified audiences for generations. In this episode, I'll be giving you my review of Steven Spielberg's 1975 Jaws. This is Hollywood Classics. Summer blockbusters have become an annual tradition. Movie studios bank on big-budget adventure films to generate revenue. But the birth of the summer blockbuster started when a young, ambitious director set his sights on an extraordinary project that was destined to fail. Jaws is adapted from the novel by Peter Benchley and is a story about a giant great white shark that terrorizes a beach community. And the town's only hope is in a young scientist, an experienced fisherman, and the chief of police who must conquer his own fears in order to save the people he cares most about. I'll be honest, I almost didn't choose this film for my next Hollywood Classics review because Jaws is so well liked and respected that it's hard to say something that hasn't already been said about it. But I thought today's generation would never really understand the challenges that went into a movie like Jaws. This was made in the heyday of filmmaking, where the only way to get a shot of a shark jumping on a boat was to make a shark that jumped on a boat. That's not to say this review is solely for young audiences. Yes, the younger audience will get a bit of a history lesson in the making of Jaws, but for people of my generation, I hope this kind of brings back some of those initial feelings that you had about Jaws when you saw it for the first time. Now that that's out of the way, let's continue. Jaws is a masterful achievement. The story is terrific, but the real praise goes into the making of the film. Anybody who has watched Jaws knows about the legendary troubled production it had. But despite its delays, the film succeeded in part due to the fact that everyone of the crew had trust in its director, Steven Spielberg. Spielberg and the producers knew the potential that this film had. When Richard Zanuck and David Brown, the producers of the film, first read Peter Benchley's novel, they knew this would be a great movie and didn't have second thoughts on the logistics of making it. David Brown has even gone on to say that if they had read the book twice, Jaws would never have gotten made. The key to getting the film made and keeping it in production was Steven Spielberg. Steven Spielberg was only 26 at the time, and Jaws was his second theatrical directing job. His previous work, The Sugarland Express, was very well received, but this was to be his foray into action suspense drama. I think Spielberg knew that his career depended on this film. The film was pretty ambitious for its time, and even in the writing of the script, it was a very ambitious project. The first draft was written by Peter Benchley, who did a pretty well adaptation of his own novel, and then turned it over to Spielberg. Spielberg ended up writing his own draft based off Benchley's draft, based off Benchley's novel, and he ended up writing a lot more scenes that would have been astonishing, but again, due to the logistics of making a movie like this, it just couldn't be done. Eventually, playwright Howard Sackler and Steven Spielberg's friend Carl Gottlieb were hired on to really break the back of the story and do the finishing touches on the script. Spielberg really wanted unknown actors for this movie. The only ones that he really cast were Lorraine Gary for Brody's wife and Murray Hamilton as the mayor of Amity. Spielberg felt that casting unknown actors would make this situation more real, and that this was a real event. You were watching real people go through this experience. The producers really wanted Spielberg to put big-name actors in this, and Spielberg reluctantly agreed. But thank goodness he did, because the three principals are terrific in this movie. Roy Scheider was an amazing Chief Brody. Roy Scheider can convey so much from his facial expressions. Like, you can tell what he's thinking, but then other times he is so complex, You really have no idea. And Richard Dreyfus was brilliant as Hooper, which that was a casting decision from George Lucas, by the way. But he was incredible. I loved his character as the kind of young, enthusiastic scientist. Him being the youngest of the three leads contributed to that. Hooper is unquestionably a character that you can see in films today. The kind of young, enthusiastic, environmentalist type. And of course, Robert Shaw's Quint is just astounding. There were a handful of actors in the running for the part of Quint, all of which had the big personalities of a person like Quint, but Robert Shaw was hands down the right choice. His cynical view of the world, his rugged exterior, his lifestyle, and his genius backstory as to why he hunts sharks, which was given by playwright Howard Sackler. USS Indianapolis speech is one of the greatest acting performances of all time. Side note, in case anyone was wondering, I chose Quint's speech as my final in theater class in college for my monologue. Just throwing that out there. I don't think I've ever seen or will ever see the level of chemistry between actors like there was between Schieder, Dreyfus, and Shaw. Again, I don't think those performances wouldn't have been what they were if not for their trust in Spielberg. Here's a couple of notes about Jaws just to give you an idea on the troubled production that the film had. Jaws was scheduled for 55 days. It ended up shooting for 159 days. The beginning budget was $3 million and went over budget by $6 million. The price tag on this film was $9 million. Now, everyone knows that the shark didn't work during production, or as Spielberg said, worked well enough. But everyone is in agreement that the lack of a physical shark made the film more terrifying. As Spielberg said, it made it more primal, that what we think is happening just below the surface is the real nightmare. The beginning scene with the swimmer being violently jerked back and forth, the pier breaking off and turning back, the barrels randomly showing up and circling the boat, all contributors to the fear instilled by the filmmakers. During production, the crew were given the opportunity to go back to the mainland once a week to kind of get away from the island, get a break from filmmaking. Spielberg, on the other hand, opted not to go to the mainland, but stay the entire time on the island. His feeling that if he were to go back, he would never return. Now, somewhere in that 4 months of filming on the island and out at sea, there were talks about production moving to the Bahamas, that the clear and tranquil waters down there would be easier on the mechanical shark. But, and I could be wrong about this, I think Spielberg opted not to do that. That production started here, it needed to finish here. Because of his perfectionism, because of his perseverance, Jaws is Steven Spielberg's greatest film. At least I think so. So much of what Steven Spielberg did, so much he contributed, made it the phenomenon that it is today. The fact that he did not get an Academy Award nomination for the film is beyond me. Picture this. You're shooting on an island. You're shooting at sea. You're over schedule by 100 days. You're over budget by $6 million. Everyone is getting sick from being at sea. Tension between the crew is going up. The biggest star of the movie isn't working. You or me or anybody else would have cut corners any way they could to get the production back on track. Spielberg didn't. He knew what this film was going to be. To be going through that many problems and still insist that the camera always be pointed at the horizon so you don't see land, the color red doesn't show unless it's blood or a precursor, to maintain the ending of the movie, Spielberg didn't cut corners to save time or money. And when he did cut corners, it was for dramatic effect. Not only did the crew have trust in Spielberg, but Spielberg himself ended up having to have trust in one of the key elements that made Jaws what it is, John Williams' score. John Williams' score is iconic, and when Steven Spielberg hired him on to do the music, he just kind of gave him free range to do whatever he wanted. When Williams came back with the famous notes, Spielberg laughed. He thought it was a joke. And when he heard it again, he thought there was something about it that made it work and decided, yes, this is the score for the movie. His trust in John Williams gave John Williams an Academy Award for Best Original Score. So, Peter Benchley's novel was a great representation of feeling confined or feeling trapped in a situation and that feeling of not being able to escape. The shark was the device used to manifest that allegory. Spielberg was able to turn that around and made the shark the representation of whatever might be holding you back in doing what you set out to do. The shark represents avenging your fallen brethren, your ability to take charge in a situation due to inexperience. Or it could be the fear that is instilled on you to protect the ones you care about. In my own kind of thoughts and theories about Jaws, Jaws is the representation of the fear inside of us and the determination to get past it. Much like Spielberg was determined to get past his own fears to give us one of the greatest movies of all time. Thanks for watching. Be sure to comment below and give me your own personal review on Jaws. And as always, I will see you next time on Hollywood Classics.